Business sentiment appears to have started off the second half of the year on a good note. That's according to the latest SACCI Business Confidence Index. The SACCI BCI for July came in at 110.3 index points. That's up 1.8 notches on the June number. SACCI says business sentiment has picked up relative to where it was in July 2021. Increased export and import volumes as well as an increase in vehicle sales are said to have contributed to the improved business climate. Well, to tell us more about the BCI, I'm joined by Richard Downing. He's an economist at the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Thanks very much, Richard, for joining us. Please, if you would, just expand on the factors that appear to be driving an improved BCI reading.
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to explain the index a bit. It's not a survey that we do amongst businesses. What we do is we look at developments in the economy and in the financial sector, and then, of course, put them all together into this index and get an idea of what of how the business is reacting actually to what's happening in the economy and in the financial markets and so forth. So it's not sentiment that we're testing. We're testing how business is reacting to the economy and to markets. Now, first of all, we actually have 2020 as the basis. That means that if you look at the 110.3 that you're talking about, then 2020 was 100. So it's about 10.3 index points above the average for 2020. Now, this tells us something about, 2020 has been a difficult year with the COVID lockdowns and all that, a severe lockdown actually in the second quarter, which did a lot of damage actually to the economy and set back the economy to a large extent. So much so that a lot of your real or physical activity in the economy actually lost its trend in terms of upward trend, and is now what we're actually looking at is a changed trend, taking into account all those things that the COVID lockdowns. We're taking into account the looting and mayhem of July 2021, and we also take into account what happened in terms of this year's floods in KwaZulu-Natal. So therefore, what we're measuring is a good. We're getting a good idea of where we're standing in terms of the base of 2020, being the year the pandemic actually set in, and we had the state of disaster announced and all that. So we're actually moving ahead from actually a changed trend to some extent, from a low in 2020, and we now, as we would say, the business confidence is in a holding position, meaning that it's still not sure where we're going, and there's still no strong momentum in the upward trend. So there's still some outstanding issues that we need to address, and at the moment we know inflation, higher interest rates, financial instability, which implicated by this high inflation, and that is posing a big problem actually to households, spending power and all that, and it's eroding their income. Yeah. Therefore, the Reserve Bank luckily acted in time, looking at interest rates and trying to contain the inflation process, so that consumer inflation doesn't pick up from the 7.4 to something like 9% or 10%. And Richard, that might be a big issue to handle later on.
Yeah, Richard, one of the things that was interesting in your report is that you note that there's been a decent uptake in terms of private sector credit, and that's despite a higher interest rate environment. What does that mean? What does that tell us?
Well, I think it only indicates us, that the households are under stress to some extent, and their spending power, it's difficult to make ends meet. I mean, we know unemployment is at a very high level at the moment. I mean, we're talking about 35, 36%, which is huge actually. And if you take people that actually don't even look for jobs anymore, you're moving that figure up to about 46%. So that is a big issue, and people then would try to maintain their position by borrowing money, and that is where you actually set the process of inflation in motion again. And therefore, the Reserve Bank is making money more expensive, and people and financial institutions will then actually look at you when you go to the banks and try to borrow money to see whether you can afford it, given the high interest rates that is prevailing at the moment. So it is an effort actually to contain the inflationary process. And therefore, the 7% increase in credit to the private sector, although it's an indication, to some extent, the bank, there's a responsibility actually to try and contain borrowing to some extent, because if you have cheap money or too much borrowing and creating money, then you actually have a demand side not matching the supply side, and that creates more and more price instability and higher inflation.
Yeah. Now, Richard, we know for the last number of years you've often cited load shedding as a real downer for businesses and their level of confidence in the economy, or wanting to invest in the economy. Do you think that government's recent pronouncements on the energy crisis and the interventions that are going to be put in place is going to actually help business confidence going forward?
Well, I mean, you can't actually produce without energy in your economy. Our cars are running on energy called petrol and diesel. Our households and factories are running on electricity. And therefore, the load shedding is only part of the big problem. But we know what happened to fuel prices. A lot of businesses are actually running diesel generators at the moment, trying to maintain business and to keep things up. But so it's a big problem, actually, and therefore the whole process, I think it's not a thing of choosing to do something. Something must be done. You can't just go on in this way and think you can have an economy that will grow. I mean, so you have to provide the energy for an economy to grow. And therefore it's important to look at all modes of energy generation, like nuclear, like sunlight or wind power, or whatever the case may be, to actually try to improve the supply of electricity, because we know a lot of our generation capacity is actually a lot of maintenance at the moment there must be done, and it's actually necessary to do that. But we must set something in place, and usually this takes time, to put up a new plant or whatever for electricity, and make sure that you maintain what you have. I mean, it's critical to have proper maintenance of the things you have, whether it's roads, whether it's energy, whether it's whatever it may be. So I think one of the first starting point will be to maintain and service your existing plants properly, and then move on in the same time, actually moving to other modes of energy generation that has become very, very critical. It's not a matter of choice. It's a critical issue to handle.
Yeah, no, a very sensible advice there, or suggestion there.